Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Drop the Needle podcast. I'm your host, Jim Alstott. And as always, I'm so glad you all decided to join us. Well, I've got something a little different for this episode, episode 29. In this episode, we have Mr. Joe McQuillen, and Joe is a one-of-a-kind individual, and the length of the episode went a little bit longer than normal. So instead of it being super, super long in one sitting, I've decided to break it up into two parts. So it's a little bit easier for everyone to get through because he's got so much information that is so good. I think it's important that everyone gets to see it. So without further ado, we're going to start part one of episode 29 with Mr. Joe McQuillen. Welcome to the Drop the Needle podcast, your backstage pass to the corporate jungle. I'm your host, Jim Alstott, and here, industry titans step up to the mic, sharing their epic journeys. We're hitting the high notes and the low notes of their careers, creating a symphony of success. This isn't just another interview show, it's where truth bombs are dropped and secrets are revealed. So grab your conductor's baton because who knows, this just might help you compose the next huge hit of your career. Are you ready? Let's go.
That's right.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Drop the Needle podcast. I'm your host, Jim Alstott, and I'm so happy you all decided to join us. Today, we have as our guest an author, a musician, a railroad man, a business owner, cigar aficionado, a golfer, a dad, and an all-around great guy. We have Joe McQuillen. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for the warm welcome. You know, my old man used to say, "A jack of all trades and a master of none," and so I'm on Earth School just like you, just trying to figure my way. And
I think we're
really
doing
grateful
okay.
to be here.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh.
I mean, I mentioned to you before we started how excited I was about this because I met Joe. Well, as I said, I didn't really meet Joe. I was in a Zoom session with Joe as the guest, and that was with Jen Weigel Spiritual Social Club about a year ago.
Yeah.
And in November, the first weekend in November, I had the opportunity to meet Joe in person as he was a speaker at the All Souls retreat up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And it was just a wonderful experience. And for anyone who has just a little bit of curiosity about that, I suggest you go next year. It's just a fantastic event.
100%.
So, Joe, as I mentioned, is an author, and he wrote a book with his son, Christopher. The first one, he's written two, and as I understand, he's on his third right now, or they are on their third.
We are. Yeah.
Yep. They're on their third book together, and I would like, if it's okay, Joe, if you could start out with your story and your background.
Sure. So in December of 2015, my boy was home from school. I live on the North Shore of Chicago. They were all New Trier kids, all off in school. And it was the last weekend before school started again. And so they were home for 15. And so in January 16, last couple of days, they decided to go up to a friend's lake house up in Lake Beulah, Wisconsin, which is about, less than an hour from our house or close to it. And a dozen of them were just going to go and guys and gals kick up their heels, play a little pool, drink a little bit too much. And I wasn't all that concerned because, they were in a small community. They weren't driving anywhere. They were all in one spot. And the next day, they were all spending the night, and he was coming home. And I grew up in Buffalo, and he is a huge Buffalo Bills fan, as is my son, Will, Christopher's little brother. So we were waiting for him to come home so we could watch the game. And it's kind of a religious thing with the McQuillens when it comes to the Buffalo Bills. And And as it was approaching, I was texting. I'm going, buddy, where are you? You know, we're getting ready. What do you want me to order for lunch? That kind of thing. And a little while later, I got a text from the young man who parents owned the lake house and said, Mr. McHugh, Chris and 4 friends are missing. Or Chris and 3 friends are missing. And so I had him text me the address. And I grabbed the Labrador, who's in heaven now, and jumped in the Jeep with hunting boots and winter jacket and drove up, Jim, anticipating to find him in a boathouse with a pretty co-ed or somebody else's couch or whatever.
Right.
It wasn't my first rodeo with my spirited child. And halfway up, I got a phone call, and it was from the lad who parents own the house, his brother, the uncle who lived in the area, who said, Mr. McQuillen, it's no longer a search but a recovery. All 4 boys drowned, you know, and you kind of go blank, you know, you go into shock a little bit, and but you know, I'm kind of a blue collar kid, and there were things to do, and you know, and so I went up there, and you know, to this day, I'm looking out the room that I'm in was Christopher's bedroom. It's my office at home. And I look out a window here, and I could just envision walking in that door and seeing picture window behind with the boats on the lake with the lights going, and there were divers and there were other things going on. And in one corner were a bunch of kids crying, in other corners were a bunch of shocked parents. And I just kind of skirted it all and, you know, talked to the sheriff and a coroner, and they need me to identify a picture. In Wisconsin, they don't identify bodies, you know. But one thing that did happen to me, Jim, that kind of put me on this path, and a path that I don't look like I'd be on. You know, I got a brush cut and kind of a bent nose. You know, before you and I spoke, I lit some sage and aligned my chakras. Like you, I've got some mala beads and you know, a bit of a spiritual bent. But you know, a number of years before, I had seen a medium, kind of just on 15 years before. I don't know if it was a lark or, I mean, now I know it was a connect the dots type thing. But at the time, you know, and the reading was kind of mundane until I got to my old man, who said, "There's a railroad lantern behind my head," and she said, "Your dad's here, and he's holding a caboose and telling you railroad. He spent 40 years on the railroad. Every boy in the family worked on the railroad. I was a brakeman on the railroad in my youth." And I just put that away in my mental, you know, filing cabinet, and figured, and that's something, you know, that's pretty interesting. Right. And driving up, I thought, wait a minute, if my old man somewhere that was able to connect and tell me things that nobody knew. This reading was in 2000, before the internet. My old man was just a good, hardworking union guy, loving, you know, nickname was Iron Joe. But, you know, his trials and tribulations would not have been on the internet, even if there was one. You know? So there's no way that this person could have known this information. So driving up, I thought, okay, wait a minute. If my old man's somewhere, then my son's with him. You know, that's how we rolled. We were very close, 10 kids, big family, kind of a convoluted story, but, you know, family was always first and second. And so I thought, okay, I just got to get my stuff together here, make it through this, and then try to figure that out. And that put me on a journey of, and I approached it, Jim, kind of like you. I assume that let's keep going forward. And if this is all metaphysical nonsense, let's just take it off the list and figure out another way to deal with my grief. Right.
Right.
And didn't much care about what anybody thought about the journey. I needed to, you know, family first, right? I needed to find out where Chris went after he drowned in that cold lake, you know, and and it was a perfect storm for the boys, Jim. It was, you know, partially frozen lake. They had a snoot full of alcohol, the bravado of a 21-year-old, layered clothing, untied Timberland boots, you know, and step by step, you know, when this was all coming to fruition, I kept moving forward. And what that meant, as how I met you, was, attending a medium sponsored by Jen Weigel, at the Wilmette Theater, and this and that, and Christopher come booming through in almost every one of those situations, especially early on. And the only time he doesn't come through in those settings is when somebody needs to come through more than he does, right? And so that was my path. My path was that my son was somewhere. I wanted to connect, and I wanted to find out what's next and what that means. And where that leads is just fine, but where it doesn't is fine too, So
right.
that started it.
Man.
Yeah.
And I know the story, and every time I hear it, I can't imagine, number one, reliving that as many times as you have over the years, in sharing that story and the vulnerability and the pain and everything else that goes on. That it just freaking hits me.
Yeah.
And
Jim, one thing that's important to understand is that, sharing Christopher's messages, and we'll get into what those messages are, gives me air to breathe, right? It gives me air to breathe. It allows me to be of service. And it's funny because people like Jen said, "Hey, is Sally coming up? My amazing wife. She's a therapist. First book's coming out in April. And is she coming out to All Souls?" And I said, no. And she probably hasn't seen more than one or two of interviews that I do. And it's because she doesn't want to relive it every time.
Right.
I do it for a reason. I'm not. Yeah. And when she would send me excerpts of her book, or when she gave me the complete book to read, I mean, it ripped me apart, but filled my soul the same way. But I think the importance of giving the message supersedes the pain. And the truth of the matter is, the pain's with you all the time.
Absolutely,
And there's a great line from a movie called Manchester by the Sea, where the woman lost some children, and she said, "My heart is broken; it'll always be broken." Right? That doesn't mean I don't have a full life. I have 2 other kids. I got Christmas coming up. I was golfing with friends. I work. I do. I write. I have this amazing life. But I go through life with a piece of my heart broken off. And any parent who lost child has. There's people say that. I always say when I'm talking that anyone who says time heals all wounds never lost a child, because it'll never heal.
Right.
It'll heal the minute I cross over and I'm with my boy. That's when my soul will be completely healed.
Have that peace back.
Yeah.
I know that to be true early on. So my mom's parents lost a child shortly after high school graduation, who was going to seminary. He was planning on going to seminary school. My Uncle Eddie. Yeah. And actually my dad was the one who had to identify the body, because my grandparents were out of town. And I remember my grandparents saying no parent should outlive their child. And it happened to them twice, because my mom passed unexpectedly as a result of a car accident. So I know that from hearing it from them. I don't know it personally.
Right.
And so I apologize for saying this, but thank you, Lord, for not.
No, I'm glad you don't. I don't want anybody to, I don't wish this on anybody. And I tell people all the time, Jim, we'll talk about this. I have this connection with Christopher. I get messages from Christopher, and to this day, but the truth of the matter is, I would have preferred being abysmally ignorant and opening presents with him on Christmas morning, and having no knowledge of the metaphysical.
Yeah.
But that's not the path. That's not the deal. As I got deeper into this, there's soul contracts and there's free
Yes.
will and there's so much information that goes into. My boy wasn't meant to live longer than he lived. And the amazing thing is he had touched so many people. There were 2,000 people at his wake.
Oh my gosh.
He was just one of those. He looked like Brad Pitt. He was gorgeous. He was always a champion
He's on the
of the
cover
underdog.
of your first
Yes.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both of them.
Yeah, right.
And he's a champion of the underdog. Wouldn't tolerate bullies.
Love that.
Party boy, fun athlete.
Chip off the old block.
Yeah, he was a lot better looking and a better athlete than his old man. But he just had that way about him, and he touched a lot of people, and we heard a lot of stories after he was gone from friends. One woman reached out to my wife, and Sally was at her grad school graduation, who said that she was at a party in college and in a room and considering whether to continue with her life or not. And Chris walked in and sat down, and she was deciding whether to come out and let people know that she was gay, and she was wrestling with that. And Chris walked in and spent the party with her and said, "We love you. Nobody cares about your sexuality. None of it." And she said, that changed the course of my life. We came back from a cruise 2 years, two Christmases before he left us. And I'm making a roast. We're going to have a family roast for Christmas dinner. He said, "Dad, I got to go." He said, "One of my fraternity brothers," and these are blue collar kids, just like me. They weren't spoiled kids and wonderful kids. He said, "One of the kids, something happened at home, and he's alone at the fraternity house." And so I said, we whipped a plate together, went to Walgreens and got a fragrance kit or something, wrapped it up. And Jim, half the time I'm wondering, is this kid conning me? Is there a kegger going on somewhere?
What am I missing here?
Yeah, is this a bit of a con, or is this going on? And so we wrapped up a big meal for it, and they took it back, and at his wake, a kid walked up and said, "Mr. McQuillen, I just want to tell you a story." And he told the story about him being the kid that was left alone at Christmas in DeKalb. And not only did Chris come, but he rallied a number of friends. And they all went there for Christmas night.
That's cool.
And had Christmas with this kid. So that's kind of kid he was. It's like,
he sounds like a great guy.
And a handful, buddy. He was a handful, but what a wonderful kid. So the amazing amount of people that he touched here, and then since his crossing over, the amazing amount of people that he's been able to touch, and that's our mission. That's mine and his, And I live my life two ways, Jim. I think I mentioned this when I was speaking. I live my life now to please my God and to make my son proud, And if I can follow those two tenets, then I'm going to be just okay. I'll be just fine. I'll be good.
I think you're doing better than fine.
Yeah, I do too.
You're something. And forgive me along the way if I have a moment where it hits me like right now.
Yeah, I do too. What do you? I keep a golf towel handy.
Oh, that's so smart. I got to start doing that.
I keep a golf towel right here. Keep it on my lap.
Damn it! Why didn't you tell me that ahead of the time?
You gotta have a golf towel accessible, and this, and it happens pretty much every time. And I start when I'm speaking to groups. I'll say, "Excuse me, if I take a moment." I happen to share my father's sentimentality, and Chris was sensitive and sweet, and so I'll tell you. The first, the woman from 15 years before, Jim, that medium, and she had moved to Arizona. I reached out to her after all that time, ran her down, and she said, it's pretty new, but let me see if I can do it. And then she told me things that I wouldn't find out on paper until I got the coroner's report. He was able to come through, and he described heaven, and he described the speed of things and the colors of things, and he would say, "Pop, the air, it's never cold here. The air is warm, but it's love and air. It's like love air. The pinks and the greens are like colors you've never seen. So I had a couple of sessions with her, and then I got greedy, and I hope your listeners key in on this. I got greedy. I wanted to do a reading in person with a medium who was watching my kid. I wanted somebody that was clairvoyant, claircognizant, clairconscious, all the clairs, right? And so I looked up a guy. He was in Arlington Heights, about 30 minutes away, and he had done some work for the police department, and I looked him up off of a website, and there was a private investigator in L.A. who wrote a really good book called Evidence of the Afterlife, and it turns out it was his website. I didn't realize until I was writing the book, and I went out and saw. So I made an appointment with this guy, and I'm an escape route guy, right? Gave him my first name, didn't tell him anything. He said, bring some pictures of whoever you're trying to reach. I said, fine. Now, that day, the day before, some shamrocks had arrived. Now, maybe this will tell you a little bit about me, Jim. And Christopher actually commented, man, that's so you, Dad. That we buried Christopher on January 8th, 2016, middle of winter, frozen ground.
Yeah.
We bought a number of graves. And when the snow melted, he was buried next to another couple. And I was livid. It's like, this is my kid, nobody else's. Now, the gravestone hadn't been put down because they can't do that till the ground is soft. So in June, when the ground softened up, I moved him over one plot. Now, I'll occupy the plot that he was in. As a matter of fact, my Labrador Cassidy, who was, Christopher's, just adored each other. She's in that. She's in that spot right now. Don't tell Sacred Heart Cemetery. I went there with a spade, but went there with a spade and just decided, instead of me and Casey,
10 o'clock
Cassidy,
at night.
Yeah, it was under the moon. Figure if I got away with all the stuff I've got away with all my life, I'm not going to get caught for this one. So I moved Chris over one grave, and so the ground was still loose. I'd ordered some shamrock seeds because I wanted, and shamrocks still come up through right around the edges of his grave, and so I planted those. And then before I left the house, this is a bracelet Chris gave me when he was about 5 at Disney World. It says Pop on it, and it's got a logo of Goofy, which might be an indication, of who I am.
Personality.
My personality.
Yeah.
So I had picked that out of it. It'd been sitting in my jewelry box for 15 years, and so I for some reason dug it out and put it under my cuff, and went out and saw this guy. And the first thing this guy Andrew said, he said, "Look, your son's here. He's beautiful. God, he looks like Brad Pitt." He said, "But your family was together last night, celebrating something you guys didn't celebrate." And I said, "Well, that was our wedding anniversary, which you don't celebrate 6 months after you buried your child."
Right.
He said, "But your family did on the other side." And he said, "I just want you to know that Christopher, there were moments he didn't want to be here on Earth. And we knew we wrestled with depression and alcohol and all the things that you try to self-medicate when you're going through." And he said, "But Christopher acknowledges that you were at a grave planting something, and that you're wearing the bracelet he gave you, which was under a cuff." That was the moment, Jim. I went from believing. I'd been on a journey for 6 months. I went from believing to knowing. I knew then that Christopher was on the other side. Christopher had the ability to connect, to communicate, to be with me, and just that kicked it into higher gear. I had seen 4 or 5 amazing mediums in groups and everything up until that point. And this is the first time I was one-on-one, and I have every single one of them recorded, and they're in the book. The first book, My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. But that was that aha moment when you go, okay, it's no longer I wonder, I think, I hope. It's real. This is it. They're just on the other side. They're just across, a rice paper wall from one room to the other. All we've got to do is, I was with Jen I think it was Wilmette Theater. And during a Q&A, a woman said, my sister and I, she was twins. We've been twins. We were twins and very close. And she's been gone 4 years, and I haven't heard anything from her. She was a little defensive, arms crossed. And I just said, well, what have you done, darling? What have you done to enhance the connection?
Right.
Do you meditate? Do you find a quiet place? Do you look out thin places where you guys connected? Is there anything you do? Have you aligned your chakras? I have two things, and your listeners are welcome. My email, by the way, is jbmcquillen@gmail.com. And if anybody wants, A, to communicate, and B, I have, a chakra chart, and I've got steps to connect.
I think
that are very helpful
Yeah.
when trying to connect with somebody on the other side. Just little tips, things I picked up along the way. None of this is novel or new.
Right.
I love when they call this New Age, right?
Exactly.
New Age. Rumi, 12th century poet said, goodbyes are for those who love with their eyes. For those who love with their heart and soul, there's no such thing as separation. That's the 12th century. That's how New Age this is.
That's right. That's right. I think it's hilarious.
Just because we're doing an awakening doesn't make it new,
Right. Yeah, it might be new to that individual, but the practice certainly
isn't new to society or the earth or the world.
No, not at all.
Or the soul.
Right, exactly. So I know it's been a little while, but can you describe the feeling the first time you and Christopher connected after his passing?
Well, the first time, literally, it started with Nancy Myers, who was the medium. She's an author, lovely gal. I met with her a couple times. I'd gone out and done a documentary out in Phoenix, and we went and had lunch and hung out. And so that was the first time. But I will tell you, on the time that I think you're talking about was, I had mediums telling me what Chris is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And in November of the first year of 16, I was at one of the guys I was talking about, Alan Conrad. We've been friends since 1971, Bishop Time in high school in South Buffalo. And we've been best friends ever since. We've survived the loss of his wife, the loss of my son, my alcoholism, which I said I'm in recovery 39 years now. And we were together last weekend in Florida with a couple other boys, the guys. And so I went to his wedding, and I'm famous for the Irish goodbye. Nobody leaves the party the way I do. It's like I'm just gone, right? And
I've got a friend who does that.
It's
Michael
a God-given, right? It's Irish goodbye. It's a God-given gift, right? My wife said, "How do you do it? I want to try it." I go, "It's not for you. You make eye contact. You say goodbye to people. You just
you're moonwalking out, so it looks
you just gotta go. Somebody, they snap the ball and you're gone." And and so I'd done that at his wedding after a wonderful wedding, and ended up on a beach in Sarasota. The first night, I think I was in Lido Key, the second in Siesta Key, and I was walking on the beach just to connect with Chris and feel a little sorry for myself or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Smoking a cigar with the pant leg khakis rolled up to my calves. And I just felt this overwhelming rush of energy come through me. And I knew Christopher was there. And I started to cry, like bawl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was significant. And then on the anniversary of his crossing, January 3rd, 2017, I'm in this office. And I had started coming in here. I would get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was before I had to start getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to pee all the time.
Right.
It was just, something woke me up. And I'd come in here and I'd meditate and I'd light sage and I'd feel them. And I'd love that. On January 3rd, 2016, or 2017, I came in, was going through my routine, and I started getting downloads from him. Literally, it's like somebody talking into your ear, like in a mic that you're transcribing, right? And he was talking about heaven, and he's talking about what it was like, and he was talking about, and you couldn't believe the colors and how magnificent and how wonderful it is. And then he said to me, this is really significant. He said, you got to let go of the anger with Scotty Pop. It wasn't his fault. He was my pal. We loved each other. Holding on to that's not going to help anything. Now, you got to remember, prior to all this, I had two emotions. There was anger and anger. That's the
Right,
only,
right.
that's how I dealt with every situation, right? And I bullied my way through most of my life. Probably alienating a lot of people, but so I was angry. If I could have sued these people for, having an unlocked boathouse and or unlimited drugs or alcohol, I would have.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that, kids came over to my house, Christopher's friends, there was beer and sandwiches, and it's not, I
Right.
wasn't exactly the Lord of discipline, but I needed to be mad at somebody, so I was mad at Scotty and his parents, and so he said, "You got to let go of it, Pop," and so I said, "Sure, Chris, for you, I'll do anything," and I also thought, Jim, when am I ever gonna see Scotty again, right?
Right.
12 hours later, I get a text from some of his fraternity buddies, and said, "Mr. McHugh, we're all going to meet at the grave at 3. Can you swing by?" So I grabbed the hockey cooler, threw some beer and some Gatorade, grabbed a box of cigars. Figured hang out there with 6 or 7 guys and just honor my boy. And I pull up, and the friggin' parking lot is like circular parking lot. It's full, and it's like kids were getting out of the cars like clown cars, right?
Yeah.
There were 40 kids at his grave. They got that coconut telegraph going, and they all met there. And we were out there for hours, and we do that to this day on the anniversary, by the way. And one of the first kids I saw was Scotty, And so Chris was preparing me for the fact that I had to be ready.
Eye to eye, yeah.
Yeah, and I had to embrace him and say, "Scotty, it wasn't your fault. Could have been at my house. Could have been at somebody else's house. Chris loved you. We loved you, And I knew then, that these messages weren't a salve to put on my broken heart, that these messages were real messages. And a lot of them have to do with service to
Right.
people who've lost kids. Or, I'm a little, it's not all about losing kids. It's about losing someone significant, right? Someone you love, life partners, spouses. It all matters. There's another level with children.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, there's another level with parents. And I've talked to one parent extensively at the All Souls meeting. Parents who have kids who've taken their own lives, right? There's another level of pain or of responsibility that's undeserved. They don't earn it, right? But there's another level that said, I should be able to stop this.
That's the guilt that
there's another level of guilt, right?
Yeah.
And I, to this day, why didn't I stop him from going to the lake house? He was talking about double dating. I should have offered to buy the dinner. There's a lot of things we go through, but the reality is it's a bell. January 3rd, 2016 was a bell that cannot be unrung. It's there. Now, Joe, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And more, now Joe and Chris. Now Chris and Joe, because, he's the one driving this bus. I'm just a scribe,
Yeah, man. Did you, and I know how, because having met you, having read your books, and I say read, and I'm an Audible guy,
So am I. They're both on audible.com.
Yeah, I love them. Love them, by the way.
Me too.
Absolutely love them.
I'm an Audible guy. I'll read on an airplane or laying around the pool.
Yep,
but other than that,
too.
I'm in my Jeep listening to them.
Yeah, I do the same. And right now, so Jen Weigel has been my number one author. And I actually showed her at one of the events that she had. But you're really close.
Thanks,
you're really close right now.
I'm in good company.
Well, I'll tell you. You are quickly becoming one of my favorite authors, and I can't wait for the next one. But
yeah.
And I know the answer to this, having heard, but I'm going to ask this question.
Sure.
Because I'm sure someone out there is going to wonder this. Have you ever experienced any moments of doubt regarding the messages you received?
Now, early on, I mean, initially, I thought I left the reservation. Early on, I was like, okay, great.
Right.
This is great. Not only have I lost my kid, I'm losing my friggin' mind. But, no. And I very early, probably the first interview I did, Jim, was a radio station in Dallas, and the woman said, what do you tell people that just don't buy it? I said, tell them to change the channel. I don't care.
Exactly.
I care so deeply, but I care for people who need this, want this message, right?
Right.
Who are looking for answers. I mean, if you've closed your mind and decided none of this is real, good luck to you. When there was a big time shock jock here in Chicago, and I did an interview with him, and he said, he seemed like a really good guy, and he said, no, he said he's funny. He goes, I don't want to hurt your feelings. You seem like a tough guy. I go, I'm tough enough,
Right.
He said, you get a thick skin when you've been through something like this, And he said, I just don't, buy it. I said, you don't have to, but I'm going to ask you, do me a favor. Just keep this in the back of your mind, because someday you're going to need this message.
Right.
And then put it on recall, And if you need to, then if I'm still walking this earth, give me a call and I'll help you any way I can. So at some point in time, Jim, everybody's going to need this message. And I've done a lot of research, and there's plenty of times people come through the other side and say, dang, I was just wrong. This stuff is real and it's great and it's amazing. And tell people, ignore everything I said to them, Yeah,
right.
I came from a big Irish family, Catholic, close, dysfunctional, wonderful. And so what really helps, and me in a position where I'm, kind of an advocate for, believing in the other side and dropping the rock and allowing yourself to feel and hurt, and I was having coffee with a friend of mine's cousin, and she asked that question about, what do you think about people who think you've lost it? I said, God bless them. That's okay.
Right.
And she said, you have the unassailable self-confidence that comes from a childhood insulated with love. And so all of these were building blocks. I was loved as a child. Now, I wasn't always, my behavior wasn't always appropriate and wasn't always condoned, but I never doubted the love, right? It's the way it should be. If you're acting outside the lines, you should be held accountable. But I knew I was loved. So when I got on this project, it was like, if anybody outside the realm of people hurting because of loss judges me, I don't care.
Right.
Doesn't matter a lick to me, If people look at, that guy wrote, means nothing to me, What means is I'm being of service. I'm helping people who just don't know what to do with the burden and lifting maybe the veil that says it's not over.
Right.
It's nowhere near as good. It's a bad trade. Horrible deal. Horrible trade, right? Bad trade.
But it's
so much better than nothing.
Right.
Than
it is
thinking
something.
It's gone. And I never question it. I never doubt it. I go back and when I would have these messages with Chris, and he talked about Thanksgiving, the last download we had together. The Thanksgivings when I was out in Tucson to visit him when he was at boarding school. And Thanksgiving, we were kids in football games. And I'd forgotten half of this stuff, and so there's always evidence that none of this. And by the way, the very first meeting, I wasn't ready to let go of my resentment with Scotty. I wanted to hold on to it, right? So that's why I know none of these are me, because half the time it's contrary to what I think I know or believe.
Right. Yeah.
So when I get these things, I'll go through them and then I put them in a file cabinet, and then it's only a couple years later I'm writing about them in chronological order in the book, and I'm amazed at some of the messages. The truth of the matter is, I'm a charming guy, but I'm not all that smart. These things are really very, very sharp,
Oh my gosh.
Very sharp. So no, I don't. I was given a gift. Chris told me one of the reasons and he refers to God as the source, sometimes God. Source is a big one. It's the source of everything. And I was given this task because I'm an unlikely. John St. Augustine, who I love, John says he calls me the unwilling prophet. Right? It was like you were just cast upon you. But he said, Chris said, Pop, you're a good ambassador because you don't look like you believe in what you're talking about. And that helps other people.
Yeah.
I'm not in flowing robes. I don't have
ponytail and beads.
I couldn't grow a ponytail if you put a gun to my head.
Look at me.
Neither could you, buddy.
That's right.
I don't know. I got to get a haircut. It's getting out of line right now.
I was going to mention something, but you know.
Go ahead. Yeah. The hair. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, and I don't care about that either. You know what I mean?
That's envy.
I care about carrying a message. And if one person, as crazy as this sounds, Jim, if one person gets out of this podcast, an avenue of relief or hope, then you and I did our job. Saint, I don't quote the scripture very often, but St. Paul said, I have run my race. I have been poured out like a libation. Right. And I'll finish something like this. And I said, Chris, we did our job today, buddy. We did our job.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that just about does it for part 1 of our episode with Joe McQuillen. Make sure you all come back for part 2 of episode 29 with Joe McQuillen that will be released next week. For now, like Billy Joel says, from the highs to the lows to the end of the show, this is the end of the show. Thank you again for being the best part of us. Catch you next time.